Hey guys, Andrew Shrout here in the sideboard. I'm here with Brian Braun-Duin,
Hello?
the Season 1 points leader.
Correct.
And we're here to talk about your standard deck.
Okay.
So let's get right to it. You have shown up with Absent Aggro.
I have, yes.
So walk me through the card selections. Like what makes this an aggro deck, and what these are the kind of the aggro creatures. So tell me a little about each of these creatures.
Yeah, so much like the Pro Tour deck that Mike Sigrist made top 8 of the last Pro Tour with, we have Rakshasa Death Dealer, Fleece Mainline, and Anafenza as our cheap creatures.
Okay.
These are all just really powerful creatures that get better as the game goes longer.
Gotcha.
Anafenza not as much, but Anafenza is just such a powerful card in the metagame right now that it's just worth playing. But like a Fleece Mainline on turn 2 is a good creature.
Sure.
On turn 5, it's still a good creature because the threat of monstrosity is so big.
Okay.
Same with Rakshasa Death Dealer. On 2, it's just a bear, but later in the game, it represents a huge threat, can grow out of control, or being able to regenerate through things like end hostilities is big.
Okay. So just mid-range threats, basically, but that you have an option of presenting threats with on turn 2.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. And then, speaking of mid-range threats, everyone's favorite Rhinoceros.
Yes. Out of all the Rhinoceros creatures in Magic, this is probably my second favorite behind Mutavault. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, Siege Rhino is making a splash in Modern, so it's obviously very powerful here in Standard, and then Wingmate Rock just to go over the top as well.
Okay.
Wingmate Rock is really good against a lot of the green decks that are really prevalent right now, so being able to just go over the top of them along with your removal to clear the way is important.
Gotcha. And then for Thoughtseize, because that's a good card.
Yeah, I mean, strip their hand of things that matter.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. And then a bunch of removal.
Yeah, so one of the reasons, and in fact the major reason I decided to go with this deck is Bioblight and how good that card is in the metagame right now.
Okay.
Basically the two axes of the format are the Jeskai Tokens deck and the big whip decks, and Bioblight's very effective at both. It deals with Hordling Outburst, probably like one of the best cards in the tokens decks.
Okay.
And it also deals with Hornet Queen, which is the biggest problem out of the whip decks.
Gotcha.
Normally speaking, like Downfall and Abzan Charm with our aggressive threats are going to be good enough to beat the whip decks by themselves, especially with Anafenza wrecking their graveyard. But if they just stick a Hornet Queen, they can stabilize behind it, and that's where Bioblight comes in to clear out all their Hornets and then keep putting the pressure on.
Okay. And then Downfall and Abs and Charm
are just
the best removal spells.
Yeah, they're just the best removal spells, basically.
Okay. And one Murder's Cut to round out the removal suite.
You always got to have the Miser's Cut, just so you have access to, sometimes late in the game, that 1-mana removal spell.
The Ninja Cut.
Yep.
All right. So the mana base, it's a mana base. We don't need to talk about it too much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could talk about how bad it is if you wanted to.
All right, sure. I guess you just have really heavy color requirements, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you saw through the deck that we have things like Anafenza, Fleece Mainline, Death Dealer, Rhino. All of our cards are super heavy mana requirements, requiring some green and white mana early on, which we have like Windswept Heath, Forest, and Plains. But then we also have Bioblight, which is not the easiest to cast off of that. So the deck has to play like a second copy of Urborg, which no one ever really wants to do that, and things like that. I really think that the deck is very powerful, but its biggest weakness is itself.
Gotcha. Okay. And you actually have to have some number of basic lands to go with your Windswept Heath as well.
Right.
So a lot of hoops you have to jump through there.
Yes.
All right. Before we get to the sideboard, I want to talk to you a little about your preparation for this event.
Okay.
This is a very small event.
Right.
And more so than most events, you can actually, you're friends with a lot of the competitors already. You can predict reasonably well what some of these players are going to be playing.
Yes.
So like what kind of metagame are you expecting?
So I'm expecting a lot of tokens, blue-white heroic, and various whip decks, especially Abzan.
Okay.
There's going to be a couple players that I think are playing control decks, and I think Abzan aggro is good against control decks.
Okay.
And I really put my testing with those 3 decks in mind: tokens, heroic, and the whip decks. And I was definitely crushing all the whip decks with Anafenza and all those cards, so I was really happy about that. And I put a little work into the sideboard and some of the main deck choices to be better against heroic and the tokens deck.
Okay. So we'll get to the sideboard then, and we'll just walk us through card by card here.
All right. So Glare of Heresy, I originally had 4 of these. In fact, I kind of wish I still had 4 because the card is just so good against almost every single deck. Against the control decks, gets rid of Elspeth and Banishing Light. Against heroic decks, it exiles all their creatures. Against the tokens deck, it gets Jeskai Ascendancy itself, which is, in my experience, the way you generally lose. And then against even some of the whip decks, they have things like rhinos and things that you potentially can bring in glare if you want.
Okay.
But it's really just a powerful card against almost the entire format.
Sure.
Drown in Sorrow against Jeskai tokens is really the only deck I'm expecting to bring this card in against.
Sure.
But it was really integral to winning post-board games against them, and I figured since that was the matchup that was the hardest for me in testing, I wanted the full 4.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the extra cut.
Yeah, sometimes you got to have a second Miser's Cut.
Yeah, sure.
So you can slice them up twice.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can still call it a Miser's Cut if it's the second one.
Still a Miser's Cut.
All right.
Yeah.
It's the sideboard Miser's Cut.
Yep.
All right.
All right, and then I'm going to be sending, there's a lot of creatures like Doomwake Giant, Corsair Crewfix, Eidolon of Blossoms, along with things like Whip of Erebos. And I've felt that these cards for quite some time really haven't been getting in touch with their primal side.
Gotcha.
Like they're really not really in touch with some of the beauty that nature has to offer.
They're too sophisticated.
Yeah.
Too highfalutin.
Yeah, exactly. They're,
right.
they're really involved in technology, and it's just,
Okay.
I'll have none of it.
Sure.
They're going back to nature.
All right,
so,
deal.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's really my plan against the whip decks, is to send them back to nature. And then we have a couple of Sorens and a couple of Nissas, which these are primarily for the couple of control decks I'm expecting to play.
Okay.
But Soren also has been exceptional in post-board games against token decks as well.
Gotcha.
A lot of times you come into a race situation where your rhinos are trying to kill them before, their 4/4 Hordling Outburst tokens with all these Jeskai Ascendancy triggers kill you.
Okay.
And that's where Soren comes into play.
All right. Fair enough. Seems like you've got a pretty solid plan here. Thanks for coming in and talking with me.
You're welcome.
Stick around. We've got plenty more coverage coming of the Players' Championship here in Roanoke.